Welcome back to the Tree.Church Bible Study. My name is Chris Reed, and I am your host for this podcast. Really excited that you're joining us today. We have a great conversation in store for you, so join with me here in just a second as we jump into James chapter 4.
Did you miss getting into a Connect group earlier this fall? Do you want to experience group life here at the Tree? Do you want to grow spiritually and be connected with others who desire the same? If you are interested in getting connected in a short-term group while you wait for another opportunity to sign up for a regular group in the winter, then Midway Group is for you. Visit the app to join.
Well, hey, welcome back to the Tree.Church Bible Study. My name is Chris Reed, and really glad to be here with you today. Today, I'm joined by Mary Stalter, who is the Director of Youth Ministry.
Yes, hello. Thank you for having me.
Is it youth ministry or is it junior high ministry?
What, my title?
Yes.
I am the director of
No,
junior
are you
high.
in junior high?
Oh, I'm in junior high,
No.
yes. I am a seventh grader. No, I'm the director of junior high ministry.
Okay.
Yes.
Sometimes the titles change.
I know.
Sometimes in such slight ways.
And some of them just don't flow off the tongue like you'd like them
Sorry.
to.
So I apologize.
Oh, you're good.
And then we have Phil Venrick, who is the director of Next Gen.
Good morning.
How we
Good to be
doing?
here. Good, Chris. How are you?
Good. You have a little tear in your eye already. Are we? You
Well,
okay?
I just love you people.
Have I upset
you? This is called allergy season.
Okay.
Yeah.
Woo.
Doing okay today?
Always have a little tear in my eye.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, today, instead of just asking you questions, we're going to play a small game of Would You Rather. So,
Ooh.
got some good ones here that I think
Love
should
it.
be revealing of our personalities and whatnot. So, so the first one, would you rather rappel off a 300-foot building or climb into a cave that has a 3-foot opening?
See, this is a very easy answer for me because one of them sounds like an adventure of a lifetime and one sounds like my worst nightmare.
Okay.
Rappelling off of a 300-foot building, fun Tuesday. Absolutely. I'll do it anytime.
Okay.
Being anywhere in that closed space, like when people talk about like going like exploring in caves that are like, and then it just kept getting smaller and smaller. I was like, do you hate yourself?
Yeah.
What do you mean you kept going?
I am with
No
you.
shot. Yeah.
Exactly the same answer. I'll
Oh.
rappel off anything. I jump out of a plane. I love that kind of
Yes.
stuff. But tight spaces, and I
No.
remember as a kid being held down by my siblings under a blanket and being tickled. And I think that's where it all started.
Sure.
Sure.
I think my siblings started all this because I remember like, if it was a panic attack, that's probably what it was. Like I knew they weren't going to kill me, but were they? Were they really letting me out?
Right, right.
I remember having that thought of and just screaming and wanting out of that
Yes.
space, a blanket, and I could breathe and everything was fine, but still just that feeling of not being able to escape.
Yeah, no way.
Well, I'll tell you what, yeah, it's the feeling of not being able to move or get out of the situation you're in. I don't mind small spaces like that. Like I don't get claustrophobic in like small spaces, but it's the not being able to move. Like when those guys go into caves and they're like this, like they've got their hands above their heads and they're like the rock is on their chest and their back. I'm like,
What are you doing?
Yeah, what are you doing?
What
like,
are you looking for?
Even just watching it. I
panic
almost
watching
can't
it.
breathe.
I won't watch it.
Have you seen the ones where they're on their back and they're
No.
like going under something and then
Yes.
like they're like, oh, it's starting to rain. There might be water coming. I'm like, what? Wait,
Yeah.
What do you mean?
No,
I was already
no.
hyperventilating.
Your head's in
Now we're about to
there.
drown.
No way.
Yeah.
I went, whoa. I had a funny experience when I was younger. I have an older sister. Her name is Macy. And when Michael and I would team up on her, it was like a unique joy because it never happened. And this one time we were playing hide and seek. All of our cousins were there. And Macy was like, Mary, come here. Shut the door. And she was in a towel closet and she couldn't fit with her arms down. So she put them up in the air. And I was like, okay. And I shut the door. We left her in there for hours. Hours. I was like, no one let her out. She's banging on the door. Let
Poor
me out,
Macy.
please. And we were like,
Oh my
no
gosh.
shot. You're in there for life. And so she probably doesn't like confined spaces either.
Oh. Well, funny. So my wife is married to, my wife is married to me. Let's try this one more time. My wife is this is going great. My wife is sisters with Pastor Brandon's wife. So that's what I was trying to get to. And Megan is terribly afraid of confined spaces. And it's because, like what you said, so Cassie would tell me about, they would play this game called Smother Time, and they would get
smother.
They would get blankets and they would cover each other up, and they would do that same exact thing. And it's like,
was everybody on board for Smother Time?
Oh yeah,
or was
it was
like,
a family game,
or was it like we're gonna pick someone? That's Smother Time.
No, I think they all played, is from my understanding of this game.
Crazy.
So there's a little bit of claustrophobic, but I don't know that Cassie is though.
Isn't it funny how
it hits some people different? Yeah.
My nephew locked himself in a trunk when he was like 9 years old, and we lived next door. And so my sister-in-law calls me. My brother wasn't home. She said, "Get up here. Ryan's locked himself in the trunk. I don't have the keys." He had the keys with him. It was like this whole thing.
Gosh.
And I mean, I was panicking. He's fine. He's in there going, "I'm okay." You know, it wasn't bothering him at all.
Right.
You know, he was perfectly fine. And I was like, "We gotta get him out now." So it's funny just how different people react to different things.
Yeah.
I'm just glad I wasn't inside there instead of him.
Yeah. No, thank you for the small spaces. I'm with you. I'd go off the 300-foot building. So would you rather eat the same food every day for 10 years or never be able to eat the same food twice?
I would say never be able to eat the same food twice, because I like food well enough that I'm like, ooh, something new every day. And so I think I would like I'd be okay with not being able to repeat my favorite thing.
I'm the same way. I'm not a picky eater at all. I would say there's like 2 foods that I'll typically like avoid. And when I mean avoid, it's like I'll just like pick it off if it's like on, like if there's olives on my pizza, I'll probably brush them to the side. But I am not a picky eater at all. And so the thought, even in one meal, if it's like meals that are not diverse, but it's like a pot roast. I hate pot roast because it all tastes like pot roast. Like the carrots taste the same as the meat, and I hate that. And so I think I'd struggle eating the same thing every day.
For 10 years, I like you picked 10 years. I couldn't even do it for 10. I don't even like 10 days.
10 days?
Yeah.
We've had pasta twice this week.
Yeah, no, I'm the same way.
I both sound terrible to me.
Really?
Like both would be my nightmare, because I want to be able to eat the foods that I like again.
If you go to a restaurant, will you typically like get the same thing?
You know, I do find myself doing that, but then I'm cognizant of the fact that I do that, and so I try something different.
Right.
And it's usually because I have a rare chance to get back to the restaurant that has something that I tried once and really liked, so I'll eat it again. But for the most part, like, I like trying new things. Like, I like different foods, and so I don't know that maybe if you gave me pizza, I could do 10 years of pizza every single day. I could maybe do it.
No.
Yeah, I get tired of pizza.
I like the same topping.
Come on.
I like my I get the same pizza topping almost every time.
What do you get?
Man, cheese is my favorite. Like, just a cheese pizza, like my favorite. Hawaiian every once in a while.
Yum.
So,
delish.
But yeah. All right, last one. And this one is a little aggressive. So, would you rather punch someone or get punched by someone?
I'm punching every time. I don't like pain, and I think it's a release when you get to punch. I'm punching.
You know, I'm just curious. So I'm just now seeing this question, and I'm just like curious about like, what's the mindset of someone who'd rather get punched? Like,
well, I mean,
would you rather get punched?
You know, I don't know.
You're a really kind guy.
Is that what it is? You don't want to
hurt anybody?
Else?
No, it's not. No,
Mary and I go right to self-protection. We don't want pain. We'll give it to somebody else.
Come here.
No, I think it is like having to live with the fact that maybe it is that. Maybe it's having to live with the fact that you would have hurt someone. Like, you know, I don't know where I'd fall. Like, I don't think I'd have a problem punching somebody.
Is it just an innocent bystander? Like, go punch that citizen?
No. Like, we're not just walking down the street cold cocking people. Come on.
Because in that case, I think I'd rather just get punched.
I don't know.
So let's just leave this one at the scenario is going to change our answer.
Okay.
I just think like, I think punching, first of all, you're going to hurt yourself punching someone.
Sure.
If you're not trained at it, like, you're going to get hurt anyhow.
You're going to get hurt either
So
way.
now you've hurt someone, you've offended someone, and you're going to get hurt.
You're going to get hurt.
So, but I don't know. Like, I've never been punched in the face, but like, I've boxed before, but like friends, like, you know what I'm saying? So like, but I've never been.
Don't you hate to watch somebody get punched in the face? Like even boxing,
Yeah.
but then like videos where people get punched and stuff. I'm like, oh, I hate to see that.
Yeah.
I hate to see it.
I hate it.
Yeah. So we'll leave that one. We'll leave that one as situational, and
situational.
And okay. So
punching every time.
That's kind of aggressive. It's an aggressive segue to what we're going to be talking about today, because James, as we get into James chapter 4, he starts with this question of what causes quarrels and fights among us. So it really has nothing to do with that, but I thought it'd be a funny segue. So Here we go. So we're going to pick up in verse 1, and then we'll go through a few verses here, and then we'll just start talking. So James chapter 4, verse 1, what causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? You desire and do not have, so you murder, you covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. Man, I butchered that. So, so here we have James, and he is getting into a part of the book where he is going to, he's starting to go down, and he's saying, like, what is going on within you right now that causes the disunity within your church? What is causing you to be frustrated? What is causing you to not get along? And this is, he's writing specifically to a group of people, but like this is kind of general across the board, right? With humanity in general. He talks about this idea of war, of this kind of war inside of us. Can you talk about, Mary, for a minute, what is he talking about when he talks about the war that's inside of us?
I think the war that's inside of you is like your human desires, what comes naturally to you, what you're wanting, with also what's right. So like there's a war of like your passions and what you desire. Like, I want to have that, but in order to get that, you have to do X, Y, Z, or maybe do the wrong thing. And so like I've felt that 100 times in my life of like a tension of, I hate that person because they have something that I want, but it's like, I don't actually hate that person. Like, I just hate that I don't have what that person has. Yeah.
Phil, you oftentimes talk about, and you will mention a lot of times, like this idea of the fact that we're Christian, but we're still human. Expound on that just a little bit and talk about how that plays into this idea of that war inside of us.
Yeah, I think that is the war inside of us. We're Christian and we're human. That human war, that fleshly war that we have to battle every single day, that is the war that's inside of us, because sin broke this world.
Yep.
And we can't change that. And so we have to live in that tension every single day. And I think that's the war.
So what you're saying is that just because we're Christian, we've not got it all together yet, or whatnot.
Right. Now the only difference there is now we've recognized that we need a Savior.
Yeah.
And that we know who He is. And yes, He will make us better step by step, but
Sure.
we still have this humanness that's going to be with us until we're in heaven.
Yeah, and I think that and you mentioned this, Mary, the whole idea of like, I see what somebody else has, and repeating what James says, but in your own life, I see what somebody else has, and I go, I want that, and it's that I'm willing to, I'll do whatever it takes to get that, because I want that. And so passions, desires, like the terminology that James uses, oftentimes we hear that and we think every desire that we have is wrong. Everything that we want is bad. Are there good things that we can we want good things, and can it still play out in a bad way? Do you understand my question?
Yeah. I absolutely think that. I in my own personal life, I know, and Pastor Phil and I have talked about this 100 times, just in a mentorship way, even of like, how do I manage this tension of, I am a personality type who likes to achieve. I'm a personality type that likes to get respect within my peers and keep moving up and just do well. And I had a really hard time it's still a tension within me, but thankfully I've learned a little bit how to manage it. But I've always had a really hard time with the tension of, I want to be here, and I'll do almost anything to be here, which is a good goal to be better, to better yourself, to grow as an individual, to grow in your job or in your personal life, wherever. Yeah. It's a good goal. But the way you get there and the way you push and fight and claw your way to where you want to be can get toxic very quickly.
Sure.
And so that's a tension I have felt in my own life.
Yeah. This is, I think, really, I think it really, what James is getting around to and what it's rooted in is, if we can, and I want to say, okay, so pre-Christian, life without God, I think without the source of who is supposed to fill us, who is supposed to, because think about, like, so you said with career, like there's this level of our careers that we look to our careers to fill something inside of us. There's a level of our careers that satisfy our sense of purpose. It satisfies our sense of value, our sense of worth. And so we are striving to achieve because we know that if we achieve that, we'll fill that space in us. We'll feel that. And so, like, we get this sense of lack if we don't have either that one item or that thing, but then throw God into the mix of that, the one who is supposed to be the source.
Right.
There's still that learning of that balance of, like, figuring out, like, how does God fill that space in me versus am I still allowed to pursue that thing?
And I think that when the danger really sets in is when it becomes an obsession or like an idol, all of these things of you're no longer looking to Jesus, or maybe you never were, but you're not looking to Jesus to fill voids in your life. You're not looking to him to fill these things. You are solely looking, almost like obsessing over these things, of these desires. And that's, I think, when it gets so dangerous and so hurtful.
And I think even learning to keep God in those desires. And what I mean by that, when we talk to the kids a lot, we talk about sports and arts and different things that they're doing in school and in life. And that stuff can so become idols in all of our lives. And so I always ask them, how do you keep God in this? And so just really, as Christians, constantly introducing ourselves to that thought of, I want to keep God in everything in my life.
Right.
And so how is, even when I talk to the kids about video games, how do you put God in a video game? Well, yeah, you're not sitting there spouting off scripture while you're playing video games, but at the beginning, if you are mindful enough to go, God, thank you for this video game. I realize I have this because of who you are. And just that mindset of just introducing God into everything you do can help you keep track of not losing those desires to idolatry, I think.
Sure, yeah. And you mentioned a key word in that. Things quickly become idols whenever God is not the center of them. But when God is the center of them, they're gifts. They're like what you said, that God, thank you that I get the opportunity to do this. God, thank you that I get the opportunity to lead my family. God, thank you that I get the opportunity to work in the job that I do. And so, like, I see in my life that tension on display almost every single day. Like, it's a constant thing to fight covetousness, to fight greed, to fight this. And it can create so many other problems around it. It creates so much insecurity when you fail to see the gift and it becomes something that you need to fill that space inside of you, to fill that want inside of you, that desire. James is going to go on, and he says, you do not have because you do not ask. You ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions. You adulterous people. That's our James goes straight for the throat here.
Sure does.
And do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. Or do you suppose it is to no purpose that the scripture says he yearns jealously over the Spirit that he has made to dwell in us? So James does use strong language, and he takes, so these good things that we've been talking about, you talked about them becoming idols. Well, the Bible has a lot to say about idolatry and about how we view the possessions, the desires of our heart, and how we view those things in relation to God. He calls them adulterous people. So, like, the language of relationship is kind of really all over the idea of idolatry, because the relationship with God sits at the center of our faith. Like, it's at the center of everything that we do. So you get this imagery of it's not that you're just pursuing an item, it's that you're abandoning a relationship because you're not trusting God to provide. You're abandoning a relationship. So why the word world is, why does James say, like, that friendship with the world is enmity with God, or it's kind of contrary to God? that term world, that can mean a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Phil, how would you define what James uses, the term world?
Yeah, it's so funny because I think so many people define this so differently. I think Christians define this so many different ways.
Yeah.
I hear it out there. For me, I just see it as, I think what you just said, Chris, anything that separates us from that relationship of Jesus. And so, people can describe music as the world or different things, but I don't think it's a specific thing that he's talking about. I think it is that relationship. He just keeps speaking of it over and over again. And he's saying, when you let something separate you from God, that's what this world does. They don't want God. They despise God. They turn away from God. And so when you're doing things like the world, you're walking in an opposite direction of your God.
So anything can be the world.
I believe that's how I feel. I think anything that separates you from God is then, and I don't even know that he's talking about like a specific thing. He's just talking about things that separate you from God. I mean, he is talking about the world and the things that are happening in the time and in that culture. But I think what he's saying is anything that lets you separate your heart from God is something you don't want to dabble in, and something you don't want to be a part of.
It's super interesting. No, I was just processing through even like what you said and what Phil was just touching on. It's so interesting to think about how, like I was thinking about that question of what is the world and how quickly that definition can change due to culture and time. Yep. Like what that would mean. Because, so we have an age difference. I think all at this table, we're all different ages and like different even seasons in life. And so I think all of our definitions of the world would be different.
Sure.
But it is so interesting to see that like God sees that as like an adulterous thing of when we set culture in the world and all of these things as like, but I desire this so deeply. And he's like, why don't you desire me?
Yeah.
Why aren't you desiring me like that? Like a lot of teenagers, like that's my core focus on a lot of things because I am young and I also am over junior hires.
Sure.
I'm with them a lot. And I view the world through their lens a lot of the time. And so seeing them and TikTok and social media and all of these things, seeing the way that they view culture and see the world and desire it so deeply, desiring love and likes and adoration. And I bet I see it as like, God's like, why aren't you desiring me that deeply or with that kind of passion?
Well, yeah. And as you guys were talking, the things that kind of really came to my mind were like, it used to be when I was a kid, like you had to get rid of, if you were going to be a Christian, you had to get rid of all of your secular music when you became a Christian. Like that was the big thing for a long time. And I think I've shed probably 3 or 4 different collections of music at certain times in my life.
I remember a cassette tape burning. If you
oh my gosh.
Getting rid of the evil. Getting it out. Getting it out.
And that was the thing in Christian culture as I was being raised, like as I was coming to faith, and so that was a big question of, is this the world? Is this music of the world? And here's the thing: I think there are standards, there are certain things and certain qualities of things that make things obviously anti-God, that pull us away from our relationship. Things like, obviously, I mean, the claim with music was that it was devil worshiping. Obviously, devil worshiping it pulls you away from God, right? But like I think the harder thing is the more subtle, subtleties, and where there's a little bit of play is that there are, and where I think most people's questions come, like, well, is this worldly or is it godly, or I think it comes in the subtleties, and I think you represented it well. Like there are things that Phil would have experienced that he would have learned were worldly. There's things that I did and you did, but the Spirit really needs to lead us into those things, and we need to be careful. I think on both sides of it, we need to be careful to not judge certain generations and call things that are not stumbling blocks for them. If it's not those overt things, not call those things worldly. Right. And on the other end of it, I think we need to be very conscious of our own hearts to go like, what does this do to my heart? What does this do for my relationship with God, and how does it play into that?
And that terminology, worldly, always makes us go to things and places and situations, and not so much feelings and the things that we're acting internally. And I think that's what it means. That it means don't are you gossiping like the
Right.
world? Why
Yeah.
are you,
Yeah.
not so much of these, and I think a lot of times Christians will go, well, we don't go to those places, and we don't talk to those people, and we don't act like that,
Right.
and we don't have that sin or those specific ones we
Right.
pick. And it's so much more about what's going on inside of us, in our heart and our mind and our soul, of how we're acting in these everyday things, in our thought processes, and the way we treat people and stuff like that.
Yeah, and don't hear me saying it like I don't think I'm trying to communicate that there's not some standard, like that the Bible doesn't communicate a standard or anything like
no,
that. But
absolutely not.
but I think there is so much to, like, even that, like the subtle things that we do, the behaviors that we do, the way we feel, those things can be just as much worldly as And I'm just repeating what you're saying. So.
I think it's interesting that that he does say the world, and he doesn't say don't be like the Romans, or don't be like your little group of friends that I saw over there gossiping, or don't be. He's using this great big word that encompasses, for me, everything outside of a relationship with Jesus.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and everything outside, because I think we've already touched on this. We can have a relationship with Jesus, but everything that would pull away from that relationship with Jesus. You know what I'm saying? So those tensions, those feelings still happen inside of us, like we mentioned earlier. You know what I mean? So you guys have any other thoughts on that? All right. But he gives more grace. Therefore, it says, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Submit yourselves, therefore, to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Be wretched and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to gloom. Man, James is super happy here today.
Yeah.
Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will exalt you. All right, so James pivots from like identifying these behaviors, this heart, this way of thinking and living that is anti fostering our relationship with God. It's worldly. It's pulling us away from God, and then he gives practical advice for like what to do. And so he says, and what's beautiful is he doesn't go to like, well, God's condemned you because you're worldly. God's condemned you because you're adulterous. He says, but he gives more grace. He says, so here's another opportunity. Here's a way to change living that way. Here's a way to change the things that stir the fights amongst you. And he goes into these really like, he's like, resist the devil, submit yourself to God, resist the devil, and he'll flee from you. And essentially what I think James is saying is we need to take our sin, we need to take the idolatry, the things that pull us away seriously. Why, or I guess the question I want to ask is not why is taking sin seriously, but how do we take sin seriously, and why should we take it? Why should we take it seriously enough that it changes our behavior? Because that's what James is asking us to do. Yeah,
this is something I actually wrote a Bible study on recently for the Tree.Church Daily. I was thinking on taking sin seriously, and so I really put a lot of thought into this. And honestly, the journey that that I went on as I was thinking through this and processing through this is that sin is something that can seem very small in a moment, and it can feel very like flippant, and it can be a thought or a temptation. But the minute that you give any kind of attention or leeway with that thought or temptation or that small sin, it can destroy your life. Sin will, it feels good. That is as much as it will ever give you, is what you can experience from it in that moment. And I think that anybody who has gone down a path of a sinful lifestyle where it's just piling on and it grows, they will say, the best thing I ever got from it was the endorphins I received in that moment that I took part in that sin. And outside of that, it is life altering, life destroying. It destroys relationships. Sin is,
and usually that very best thing that you're talking about starts way back at the beginning.
Yes.
Just in the desire alone.
Because that's what Satan shows
absolutely.
you. Is that the good time that comes from
Absolutely.
it. Before you start to see the devastation and the...
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. Sin is so hard. It's so hard because it really is something that humans naturally desire. It is dressed up as something that is beautiful and to be desired. And so it's not like, why would you do that when someone does it? I know why you did that, because it looked good and it looked awesome. But it's in those moments of like, I need to have so much self-control before the thought even comes of like, I know what I'm going to do if I ever felt tempted by this, or if I ever thought it, and really slow down, think about it, and talk to God.
Oh, Mary, I love that whole perspective. That's such a healthy perspective of viewing it and going, I understand why you do that. Because I think so many times as Christians we can go, stop sinning. So why are you sinning? Why are you doing this against God? And the truth is when we look at it from that perspective, that's when we can help people. Yeah. When we go, I understand.
I know why you did that.
I would want that too. Yeah. I understand. That's so good, Mary.
Yeah. And I think if we think of sin, because I think oftentimes we think of sin as like this act of sin or this certain behavior that is sin, but what's rooted down deep inside of us is the sense of sin, the bent towards sin. And that for lack of better terms, for lack of better explanation, it is essentially just that bent to try to find life on our own without God. It's walking in a worldly way. It's that desire to have all the things that God promises, all the blessings of God, without the relationship of God. And so I think it's really, I think that's so good what you said, because recognizing that is natural to each and every single one of us, that all of us have that. We may not struggle with the same exact sins. Right. We may not manifest that sin nature in the same way, but all of us have that bent inside of us. And that gives us compassion. It gives us grace for each other, because one of the ways that we can flee from the devil, and one of the most important things that we have, is each other in our fight against sin. So Phil, you and I have had a lot of conversations in our time together here at the Tree. A lot of conversations and talking about how to walk away from sin, how to walk away from things like gossip, and how to talk a little bit about like the importance of having that relationship in the process of getting rid of that sin and those sin behaviors in our lives.
Yeah, I think when the last question you asked is, why is it important that we take sin seriously, and how do we do that? And I think that this all goes together. How do we do it? We constantly want to recognize it. We constantly want to be cognizant of the fact that, how I say this to the kids in children's ministry, we want to live a life that pleases God. Yeah. And so we have to be cognizant of that. Are we pleasing God? Are we doing the things that would make our Savior happy? Yeah. And that can sound cliche or cheesy, but when you really try to wrap your head around that and go, I am really here because of Jesus. Yeah. I am living my life for Jesus. And so it is important that I please him. And so that relationship is the key to your journey with sin. And so I think Mary, everything she just said was so wonderful. And what she was saying is the least amount of importance, or the less amount of importance you put on noticing sin, and the less amount of importance you put on taking it seriously, the more sin becomes that stronghold. Yeah. The more sin takes you over. And so if you aren't cognizant of it and saying, I need to be aware of this every single day, that's when it starts to take you over. And then that's the danger, is when you haven't put importance on keeping it out of your life, all of a sudden you realize your life's full of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So back to the question about the relationship side of things, though. How has that, like you mentioned something about like the importance of recognizing, why is it important to have those relationships in your life so that you can recognize?
Oh, outside relationships. Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I'm just bringing you back to it. So.
Yeah, sorry, Chris.
Don't apologize.
Yeah, so I think how do we take sin seriously? I think this is the thing we do for each other in relationship. We do things like this where we get together and we talk and we say, how is this affecting you, and what's going on in your life? We recognize things, exactly what Mary just said. We go, I know why you're struggling with this. I would struggle with this too. Let's talk about how you can do that. And so that relationship of other Christians in your life, real Christians who are really pursuing Jesus and really willing to look at you and say, I am just as messed up as you are. And so let's work on this together. I think that's the important, just that authenticity and that genuineness of going, I'm a mess without Jesus. And there's times, unfortunately, even as a pastor, even as people working in the church, that we go through our day and we don't think about Jesus often enough, or maybe not at all, because we're checking off boxes and we're getting ministry done. And so it is that thing where we have to constantly remind each other, why are we doing this and who are we doing this for?
Sure, 100%.
Yeah.
So for me, the relationship side and the side that it plays in fleeing that sin, and why it's so important or it has been so important for me, particularly like, and I'd meet with you on a regular basis. I meet Pastor Brandon on a regular basis. The level of awareness that it creates and the level of accountability that it creates, because when you have somebody, because James is going in through all these like kind of really practical ways that we can kind of walk away from sin, the ability to have somebody there that I've got to go back to and say, we've recognized this in you. How are you doing with that? Yeah. Like that changes the game.
Oh, for sure.
In a lot of different ways. Do you guys have you found, or could you share a story of a time where that has kind of helped you process through something in your life?
Yeah, I would say my relationship with Pastor Phil, we meet often, and even a year ago around this time of year, I was really struggling and with a lot of things, and the way I was processing things, viewing it through a very, I would say, worldly way, and which brought a lot of confusion. And honestly, it was a lot of like the Lord wasn't speaking that into me at all, but it was the world. It was, this isn't right, all of these things. And so I started meeting with Pastor Phil, and he was like, no, that's not right. What you're saying isn't right. I love you. You're awesome. That's not right. And it even got to a point where now I know every week, we meet once a week. I know, all right, I'm going to talk to him about this, and I'm mad. I know what he's going to say. But I keep myself accountable.
Because you're mindful of it. Yeah. Yes. And you know how much I love you. And the same thing, like even when we all meet, when you meet with different people, like that helps each of us. We hear these stories and we hear the things you're struggling with, and you go, yeah, me too.
Yeah.
And so and as we talk about it and as we make ourselves mindful of it, then we go. And so that, what you just said, Mary, I think is such an important thing for us to do with God. And that goes back to that pleasing God thing and going, I know what God would say.
Yeah.
I know what God wants me to do. What am I doing? You know?
Yeah.
But it even stops things in its tracks for me now, genuinely, where I start to have a thought, an angry thought, or this isn't fair, or this is weird, or a temptation, anything like that, where that thought will be planted in my mind. The amount of times I've used a visual that Pastor Phil, where he's got all these things on his desk and he's like, well, this is you and this is me and this is this person, and he's organizing. But the amount of times I've looked back on that and said, no, like what my human nature is trying to do right now, or even like what the enemy is trying to speak into me, or anything like that, I can stop that and say, I know that that's not true, that's not biblical, and that's not Jesus, because of the relationship that God gave me through Pastor Phil and any of the pastors and of my coworkers and any of the Tree staff. And so it really is like such an essential part. I 100% know for a fact that I would not be in ministry if it were not for the relationships in people here.
And I think as I think about people listening to this that aren't on staff at church, that don't have some of the advantage and the privileges that we have, how do you do that? This is connect groups. This is regularly attending church. This is the importance of being together with the body and making yourself mindful. Even just coming to church on Sundays, I know it makes you mindful of the sin in your life.
Yeah.
Because you're like, I'm going into this place that's holy. I'm saying that I love Jesus. Oh, I'm struggling with that. And being mindful of it is the only way it gets fixed. If you ignore something, it is still there.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what we think sometimes. If we ignore it, it goes away, and it doesn't.
Well, yeah. And even what he says, but God gives more grace. God is giving grace by exposing, and Pastor Matthew just said this, God is giving grace by putting people in our lives that help us recognize and expose the sin of our hearts and our minds, again, so that we can walk in relationship with God, because that's the end goal, right?
So good.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's keep moving on. We're into verse 11 now, and we're making our way here pretty well, so we've got a few more verses to get through, but He says, "Do not speak evil against one another, brothers. The one who speaks against a brother or judges his brother speaks evil against the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge. There is only one lawgiver and judge. He is who is able to save and destroy. But who are you to judge your neighbor?" It's so fitting that we started talking about the importance of relationships in helping each other with sin, and even started touching on this idea of being gracious with each other, because what James goes to here is this idea of don't judge each other. Don't step to each other with a heart that wants to condemn, that wants to, and oftentimes in Greek, the word for judge is really tied to a judgment already made, a condemnation, like a thought of condemnation, or a way of seeing a person in the negative light. So, which is judgment, you know what I mean? But so a lot of times it's not just not the act of judging itself, but the fact that there's already a condemnation being made. And so James commands us to say, he says, do not speak evil against one another. Do not, and I don't know if he has gossip in mind, but even so much to the point of like, don't call each other an idiot or fool, or don't look down on each other because of the sin that we see in each other's lives. So that brings up an important question. Like, is he saying don't be wise, don't have discernment, or is he saying like don't? And I guess I just kind of answered my own question.
Yeah, you did good job.
Next. So yeah,
it really is about motive.
But I guess
it's so much about motive.
Yeah, is there ever
motive
a reason to make a judgment on somebody? I guess is my question.
Yeah, and I think everything he's saying here, it is about your motive. It is when you're tearing somebody down to build yourself up, or when you know in the place of gossip. And I do see a gossip in here when I see that, speaking evil against others. When you're talking about people for the reason that I feel good because I can expose what they're doing because it looks worse than what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And so I think when you do that, it is all about motive, I think, in my mind. And so I think, when you're judging, so I think like with my kids, when I'm looking at their friend group and I'm making that judgment of whether or not I want my child to spend quality time with those people. For me, I'm protecting his heart, his soul. I want him to be around people that love Jesus. I want him to have that projection in his life because I know he will go down the wrong path because he's just like me. He's a human that's great kid, but put in the wrong situation. And so I think when I look at that situation, I'm judging to help somebody's relationship with Jesus, or even my own relationship with Jesus is good. That's a danger zone for me. I'm not gonna go, I'm not gonna be involved in that relationship or with that person. For me, it comes down to motive and what are you doing? Are you doing it to project yourself as a better person? Are you doing it for something of God's kingdom? Really.
And that does tend to make us feel so good to expose someone else's stuff. Like,
doesn't it?
It does.
If we're truthful. I mean, we have to be truthful about that. That's why gossip is so rampant in our
It is such a temptation.
Culture. Right now, just because it feels good, because wow, look at all the awful things everybody else is doing.
Think about the way that we compare ourselves with each other, and when we're thinking about it through our own minds. So like, we're talking about sin. We think about our sin, and we recognize how, man, I do this, and this. This is not godly. This is not the way that God would want me to act. But it's not as bad. And who do we compare ourselves to? Well, it's not Hitler. Like, it's not, you know what I mean? Like, it's not like, I'm not a serial killer. Like, I'm not, you know what I'm saying? Like, we go to these extremes of the negative.
This must be why I watch all the serial killer documentaries.
To make yourself feel better.
Yeah, I have not killed a single person.
Diminish my sin.
There's nobody in my fridge.
Right.
Gosh, Phil.
I'm sorry, I had to.
It's all right. Yeah, I gossip a little bit. I haven't put anybody in my refrigerator. It's like,
so I'm fine.
So I'm okay. Like, it's okay. I struggle with this. So, but like there is that level of comparison so that we can not feel terrible about the fact that we still have stuff inside of us.
It's huge culturally too. I mean, literally yesterday I came in and was like, did anyone hear about Adam Levine? Like, that's gossip. It is. It doesn't matter if they're a famous person. Like, it's everywhere. Tabloids, selling stories, all of these things. Like, it's all gossip, and it feels so good to talk about. It really does. And I think that also then feeds into our like inner circles of exposing things and like, hey, I need to tell you something. Swear you won't tell anybody, right? Oh my gosh, here's the tea, right? Like talking like that about people, and it makes us feel good. It makes us feel better about our situations and our scenario, because it's like, well, at least I wasn't doing that.
Yeah. Well, how can we deal with that? Like, I feel you teach about gossip, and we're kind of hitting gossip on the head because he kind of mentions how do we begin to treat other people with the grace and compassion? How do we begin to combat that in our lives?
For me, and I talk about it so much with the kids, and we talk about it a lot because it is a struggle for me. And so it's not coming from a place of I've got this all figured out and I'm better than you. It comes from a place of I know the damage that it has done in my life, and I hate it.
Yeah.
And so I want to fight against it. And so I think that's the healthy thing that we have to do against any sin in our lives is we have to be mindful of it. It is what I said a little bit ago. You can't just ignore it. It doesn't go away.
Yeah.
And so you just ignore it and act like it's not there, or you go, I know this is an issue, and so I'm going to think about it. I'm going to be mindful of it. I'm going to talk to God about it every day. When I'm in those situations, I talk to God like a crazy man sometimes. When I'm in situations,
Me too.
And I feel the gossip coming in. I'm like, God, I want to talk about that with them, or oh, do I have something to add to that? And I'm like, God, please, hold my tongue. And I think when we begin to judge, I think the danger in judging is when we forget what I think Mary talked about earlier. We can't put ourselves in the place of I feel that too, because now we've made them worse than us, and so we say I can't fill it out. I can't feel that sin because it's way worse than mine, and so I can't have compassion for you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I also think that keeping each other accountable is huge. I know even Pastor Phil, like he really does put this into practice. I said one time a snotty remark about someone, and I it was so natural for me to say it. I wasn't like, ooh, like get this. It just was like, they do this. And he just was like, well, that wasn't loving or kind. That was crazy. And but it was so flippant even for him. Like he just said it and then moved on and loved me no less, but moved on. And I was like, well, ouch, that was embarrassing. But it changed my whole mindset of why wasn't I embarrassed to talk like that about someone else to a pastor, even, or to anybody? Why wasn't I?
Because it becomes our normal.
It was my normal.
Right? It becomes our normal.
Yes. And that shifted my whole mindset. And you need people who are going to love you and say pass, nope, that didn't match the vibe at all. And then for you to be like, okay, that changed things for me just now.
Mm-hmm. Because gossip has become so flippant and so normal that we forget how much it hurts.
Yeah.
And so I always try to think if I think about a conversation, I think two people are in a room right now that I'm not in, and they're making comments about me.
Yeah.
That hurts my heart.
Yeah.
We don't want people saying stuff like that about us because, I'm full of sin. I got lots of yuck in my life, but I think I'm a pretty good guy. God created some good stuff here. God created good stuff in all of us. And so when we try to look for that instead of that bad and realizing how we would feel in that place of, do you want people, even when it's true, do you want people sharing your stuff?
Right.
We don't. But yet it's so easy for us to share other people's stuff because it's worse than our stuff. Right?
Yeah. And doesn't it go back to the very first thing that James talks about and the very first thing that we talked about, that covetousness and that discontentment? If I am lacking something and the only way I have to get it is to tear you down, is to make you feel bad about your stuff so that I can feel good about my stuff, doesn't that make it so much easier to justify gossiping?
Absolutely.
And the flip side of it, the way to kind of overcome that is by learning to be content in who God is and what he's given us and who we are, who he made us to be as people. I know I was just having a conversation with someone last night about this idea of just feeling insecure and just feeling like, man, I'm not as good as this person with this talent. I'm not as good as we on staff have such a talented group of people. Yeah. Mary has such a phenomenal voice. Phil, you're so gifted at at children's ministry, at conveying practical truth in such a beautiful way, in a beautifully simplistic way. And even the way that you counsel and you pastor people is phenomenal. Pastor Matthew is such a great communicator, such a phenomenal communicator. This person said to me, he's like, I'm not sure that I have anything like that to give. And like, I could sense like that level of insecurity inside of him. And I could sense it because I've been keenly aware of those insecurities. You know what I mean? And I think all of us, to a certain degree, have that level of insecurity, have a level of insecurity inside of us where we begin to feel like God has messed up by making us the way that we are. And it becomes a level of covetousness to where it begins to drive us to these sinful behaviors of judging, of tearing down and speaking evil. And so it really is rooted in a contentment that God is able to provide what we need when we need it, so that we don't have to backbite, we don't have to compete, we don't have to feel insecure about who we are, because God designed us and made us who we are.
And the more you learn to operate in that stuff, the more you feel, and I think you become safe.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you're demonstrating that when you're not participating in that speaking, when you're not participating in that gossip, people start to see you as safe. They're like, he's not going to do that about me, and so I can go and talk to him. And so I think about that so often. Like, I want people to know, I'm not doing that about you. You know, and you hear this all the time. If you hear somebody that's gossiping all the time, you know, at some point in time, they're probably saying about you. Maybe it's not true, but generally,
there's a good chance. There's a good chance of it.
You could know that it's happening, and we do that, and I've done that too. So I'm not saying that better than anyone else, or I've been that person that said those awful things about somebody else, and so I want to go back and go, okay, God, I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want that to become my normal. Right. You know, or I want to catch it when I've done it and repent, and then go, man, I'm sorry, I want to fix that.
Yeah. All right, let's finish off our verses here. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit, yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, James again with the positivity. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. It sounds like James makes kind of a 180 swing on some things, but he's not really. He's really continuing on this theme of like, why do you backbite? Why do you fight with each other? Discontentment. Because you're not discontent. Why are you in greed and covetousness? Why do you do all the, like, why do you judge each other? Because of this desire for more, things. And he comes to this place where he says, he continues his theme by saying, today or tomorrow, if we're going to go into town, we're going to go make our money tomorrow. We're going to make plans, and we're going to get the things that we want. We're going to provide, again, for ourselves the things that we think that we desire and the things that we need. And James checks it and he says, wait a minute, like, none of us gathers more, like another breath based on our plans or what we have to do. And he says we need to live in such a way that is dependent on God, and going back to like all the things that we just kind of recapped. So what does it look like practically to live? James says, even with our plans of the day for tomorrow, how do we live this out? What's the practical way that we practice dependence on God?
I think that staying mindful of God's position in your life every single day. Because I know for me, as a whole, God's number one, right? But last Tuesday, when I was really struggling with certain things, God found himself around number 3, right? So it really is like a daily,
and that's so
it's
true
a daily
every
practice.
Single one of us.
Yes, of like every day, do a little check. Where is God in my life? Because if we're finding God at 3 and 4, what's taking up slots 1, 2, and 3? Because it might be things that will drive you to covet, to be judgmental, to be envious, all of these things. And that's when we find ourselves in sin. That's where we find ourselves like convincing ourselves that like yeah, this sin wouldn't be that bad, or like we quiet the voice inside us, we quiet the Holy Spirit, we push it down, because God isn't number one. Because in reality, big picture wise, God is everything, and the only thing that we can ever want is eternal life with Him,
Right.
genuinely. And so, even thinking about the little things on earth, I want a bigger house, and I'm frustrated because a couple that got married like at a similar time with me, they're having babies and they seem like their marriage is perfect and they've got a big house and they've got all these things. And it's like, what are you saying right now? Like, what's number one? Because now it sounds like the way that people view you is number one, or your marriage is number one, all of these things. But if God's number one, big picture wise, eternal life is number one. Saving other lives through Jesus Christ is number one. Sharing love and grace and sharing that message should be number one. Everything else kind of fades after that.
Yeah, and I think how we do that. So that was so good, Mary.
Yeah.
So
very good.
when you recognize yourself at 3 and 4, where God's at 3 and 4, you're mindful. You have to get mindful of that right in that moment and go, okay, God, I need you. I need grace in this situation. I need you to show me what I should have said or what I should have done or how I should have handled that, and moving him right back into that place of. And I think mindfulness is just everything. If you think about anything you want to be good at, you are so mindful of the things that get you there.
Yeah.
Aren't you? I mean, like with music, you are mindful of how good your voice is and how your voice can be better and the songs that work for you. And you think about the ways I can do this and how can I get up there and be a better worship leader and how can I make this an impact for people, right? When you want to be good at something, you are mindful of it.
Oh, absolutely.
And so we have to have that same mindset with God of going, I want to please God. I want to be good for God. I want to be good at this God thing because it will change my life and then change other people's lives.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, on a spiritual level, like you mentioned it, like in the moment type of thing, but the practice of prayer really is a practice of dependence. Like, so being able to, in that moment, go recognize, God, I've got you at number 3. I need your help. I want you at number 1. What do I need to do here? Even basing, like, and this is something that God is kind of working in my life. Like, I've just asked God, teach me to pray. Teach me to be dependent on you. Teach me how to live this out. But then getting up and taking time to spend time with God, so that not because I hear people say, like, I didn't do my Devo today, like I'm grouchy, like almost like it's a magic pill that you take. Like, it's not a magic pill, but what it does is it creates that cognizance, that awareness of your mindset of, like, so that throughout the day you can go, oh yeah, that's right. I'm trying to walk today in a manner that's pleasing to God. I'm trying to walk today in a manner that fosters the relationship with God. I'm trying to walk today in a way that keeps God number 1 in my life. And so how do I do that? I do that by going to God first thing in the morning and going, God, I want you as number 1 today. I know there are going to be a lot of things that try to pull it away. Will you please help me?
So good.
Help me do this. So
and I think it's so easy to make for prayer to become a ritual in our lives rather than a lifestyle of our everyday life. And I'm thinking so much about prayer right now in my life because we're doing a prayer series with the kids, and we really want to get it through to him that this is not about saying these specific little prayers at bedtime, and those are good. Those devoted times are so important and so good for you.
I think they teach us how to pray.
They absolutely do, but it is about that constant conversation. And every time we say, I say, what is prayer? It is talking to God. I simplify it down just that much because that's all it is. It's not this. It is the privilege that we get to talk to God, the one who created us. And so it really is just talking to him constantly. And the more you create that is one thing I'm so thankful for in my life, is just my prayer life that God has helped me develop to where I do just talk to him. I joked earlier, like a crazy person sometimes, because I've learned to make it a habit of keeping him in my mind so that I'm like, he's right there. I can talk to him.
Yeah. And I think if you're a type of person that loses track of, like, you have a hard time staying focused during prayer, I think even the practical side of a very it's going to sound crazy, but practical thing that I have started to get in the practice of doing was, like, I was on my personal retreat last week. Went to a cabin. I just had some time to pray and seek God and just spend some time reading and quiet, and it was great. But I found myself just constantly distracted.
Yeah.
So what I did was I pulled the chair out at the table that was right next to me, and I just a little mental exercise. I went, Jesus is sitting here eating dinner with me. Like Jesus is sitting here, just wants to talk to me. And so like what it did was it allowed me to just break it down to what you said. It stopped being a sanctified act that I have to do, though it is, you know what I mean? This highly ritualistic thing, like to, hey, I'm just having a conversation with my friend. Hey, I'm actually talking to somebody right now. And so like it's just a little mental trick that you can do to kind of help keep yourself from getting distracted.
And just going back to the truth that we know that we have the Spirit that's with us,
right?
That the promise of the Word is that this guide for our lives, that's helper in our lives, is right there. Yeah. And so I've been talking with the kids a lot about this in the last couple of weeks. When you're praying, and I used to do this all the time, I'd be like, I've got these specific things I'm going to pray about, and then all of a sudden my mind starts to wander, and I'm thinking something. So I'm like, am I even praying anymore? Yeah. And I have learned that in those moments, I have to believe the promise that God's Spirit is in me and He's guiding me. Right. 100%. And so all of a sudden, I tell the kids, you start thinking about grandma, you start praying about grandma. That's where God wants your brain.
100%.
Don't be upset. Don't let that thought of, well, I'm not doing it right, stop you. Yeah. I'm having a conversation. You don't just stop talking in the middle of a conversation. Right. You fix it. You correct it. But you eventually come back in. You do. You stare blankly at me, and then all of a sudden you come back in, and we have these great conversations because you're thinking about what's coming next, right? And so you don't just stop a conversation. So don't stop that. If your brain goes to something, that's where that's where God's guiding your brain. Yeah. And then be there with Him in that moment, and He'll start to show you stuff. You're like, wow, I'm so glad I started thinking and praying about that.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for this conversation. Any other last minute thoughts, anything that you've got on your mind that you want to share before we close out?
I don't think so.
No, my mind's empty.
It was awesome to be here.
I've
said all my words.
Well, thank you guys so much again for being here with us, and great conversation. And I'm excited for others to engage in that conversation and listen and follow along. Thank you so much again for listening. We pray that you are benefiting from these conversations that we have. I know we enjoy putting them together, and if you are finding them helpful and beneficial, we would love it if you took the time to rate and review and share these podcasts with your friends. That way they can grow in their understanding of the Word of God as well. Thank you again, and pray that you join us next week.